Picking up where I left off last video, I'm starting to build the valance for the new section. And I have a 1x3 cut to fit. The notches on each end fit into the L girder. And I have the first end clamped in place. And then the second piece is glued and screwed on the end. And I have wax paper there separating the two sections so that one section doesn't get glued to the other. And the height of the pieces is set to account for adding the plywood on top later. The front L girder is secured, and I use a board and clamped it on the end so that it's level side to side and front to back. And that's temporary. That'll be removed later. I have the remaining cross-section pieces for this part of the valance glued and clamped in place. I placed the valance cross-section pieces over the top of the 2x3s we used to attach the backdrop to. And I felt that placing them there would give it additional strength. Once the glue had set up, I removed the clamps and I ran some screws down from the L girder into the cross-section pieces. And I added some additional strength by cutting triangles from the 1x3s, gluing those to the cross-section pieces, and then cutting some small pieces from 1x2s, gluing those to the wedges and the cross-section piece, and then screwing the 1x2s into the L girder. And with that done, this section of the valance is finished for now. Next, I started building the module that'll mount underneath our new valance section. And the module is 67¼ inches long and 24 inches wide. The module was assembled using tight bond and nails. I attached the new module frame to the existing benchwork and to the new backdrop frame because it's not going to be perfectly square. So I want the frame to be mounted up against those pieces, and then I can set the actual angle of it so when I cut the plywood top, I get a top that actually fits. I took the old benchwork I had running along this wall and I cut it down to fit the opening here. And again, it's not going to be perfectly square because it has to fit the new module frame and it has to fit the wall with the small window. With those pieces in place, I then cut and glued blocks into the corner of the new module frame. And with those blocks glued in place, the module frame is going to be rigid and hold those angles. Here's a view of the new valance frame and the module frame. The vertical post there is temporary, It's just holding up the ends for now. Next, I clamped a piece of masonite in place to set the radius of the corner. I made a triangular section out of 1x3s, and that the long piece of the triangle touches the masonite in the apex of the corner, and I'll have a spot where I can put a mounting screw in. I placed the new module frame over the top of a piece of 1/4-inch birch plywood, and since we glued the blocks in the corner, the angles of the frame are set, and I can trace the outside dimensions of the frame onto the plywood, and when I cut out the plywood, I know that that's going to fit perfectly on the module. Last video I said I was going to use premium lumber for the module frames. I didn't do that. I'm still using furring strips. The premium lumber for a 1x3 was $14 a board, and it's just cost prohibitive. The plywood top for the module was glued in place with tight bond and then nailed. Schnauzers. As good a dog as you could hope to have, but they are yappy. Next, I cut the sub-road bed from 1-inch extruded foam insulation board, and I glued that down with Loctite Power Grab. And now that the plywood and the foam is on the new module, I can permanently attach the module, so it shouldn't come back off again. I set the radius for the fascia on the Benchwork exactly the same as for the valance. And I used the same triangular 1x3s where the long piece of the triangle, there's an intersecting point with the apex of the fascia, and that's where I can put my mounting screws in to secure it. I cut a piece of 1/4-inch plywood to fit the curve, glued that in place, and I also cut a piece of foam to fit, and I glued it in place as well. I started working on the peninsula module next. I had to stop working on the other section because I required something that needed to arrive and the package hadn't come yet. I measured all the pieces using Extract CAD, and that was very helpful in cutting the pieces and putting this section of the Benchwork together. I know I have socks with my flip-flops. I look like a dork, but my heels had dried and split and they were very sore, and I had lotion on them, so that's why I had socks on, to keep the lotion on my heels. I have a large square clamped in the corner where I need a 90-degree angle, and then everything really is built off that corner. And here I have the module framed up, and just like the other module, it was put together with tight bond and nails. Extract CAD didn't calculate my cutting angles. I had to do that myself. The program may have that feature, I just don't know where it is or how to use it. I temporarily mounted the new Peninsula module, and from here I'll start working on the fascia in that section. After mounting the module, I found that my aisle width was 33 inches. I thought it was going to be 36 inches, so somewhere in the past I had measured incorrectly, and when I drew up my track plan, it was off, so I had to go back and correct my track plan. My track plan has completely changed since I built this section of the Benchwork. And I'm also going to run a 9-inch fascia on this section. So I need to have a way to mount the fascia and at the same time be able to build some structure into the Benchwork where I can put my sub road bed down and have something firm enough to lay track on. I know there are better ways to do this, but I have to work within the confines of what tools I have. So this is what I'm going with, and it should be plenty strong to hold a piece of flex track. I've placed these standoffs at different positions along this curve. They'll give me the shape I want and also give the fascia something to attach to. I cut sections of 1-inch foam to lay in and fill in these areas. I know it's a little bit patchwork, and I know I'm also going to have to do a little bit of rework in this area in the future, but this is what I'm going with. I glued some 1-bys in between the standoffs. Those will give us some additional rigidity. And I'm going to be laying track in this section, so I want to make sure that my foam's not going to sag in the future. I know this section's a little bit patchwork, but I think it'll be okay. It is pleasing to the eye, the shape of the module here, and you know, I'm just going to make it work. I'm using a similar process with our new Peninsula module, building standoffs here to set the curve of the fascia. There's a big difference though in that when I put the plywood down and I cut the plywood to shape, that all these standoffs are going to be attached to the plywood, and so it's going to be pretty rigid. I placed a 4x8 sheet of 1/4-inch plywood up onto the module, and then I got underneath and traced the shape. I cut the plywood with the jigsaw, and after the piece was cut, I took a sanding block and cleaned the edges up, tried to get rid of the slivers so they don't end up in my hand. Same process as before. The module top was glued and nailed in place. All the mounting positions for the fascia can be seen hanging down under the module in this picture. I placed a 4x8 sheet of 1-inch foam up on the module, and just like with the plywood, I traced out its shape and then cut it out. Foam is now glued down to the Peninsula module with Loctite power grab, and I think this is where we're going to end this one.